All right, hello everybody. Once again, we are talking about an aliens book, the third one in this omnibus, which is called The Female War, which seems like it would be. That just seems like someone's going to find that offensive no matter what happens, doesn't it? So every time I read about these books, I finished reading the book, and then I went and looked kind of like at its history, and every time I read one of these books, I learn more stuff about like the process of them being made, which, okay, so apparently, this third book, The Female War, was written in 1993 as a novelization of a comic book series by the same name. And in fact, while I said previously in previous reviews that the previous two books, Earth Hive and Nightmare Asylum, I thought that they were adapted from novel to comic. In fact, it's the opposite way around apparently for all three of these, at least according to Xenopedia, right? So, take with a slight grain of salt, but this appears to be the consensus on how these books were made, is that they were all adapted from a particular set of comics that had three parts, much like this has three parts. This novelization was written by Steve Perry along with his daughter, Stephani Perry, and it continues the saga of Billy and Wilkes fighting the aliens, which is what we've been seeing in the previous two books. Now, the spoiler for the last book at the very end, and it's just not really a spoiler because it doesn't tell you anything about the plot, but maybe a better word is the surprise. The surprise at the end of the second book, Nightmare Asylum, is that they meet Ripley, and it's like, oh, hey, cool, here's Ripley. And so now Ripley is a character in this series of books, and Billy and Wilkes and others are going to team up with her to keep the fight going. This book in particular relies very heavily on the telepathy ideas that we got from the previous books. So that is like absolutely crucial plot point that that the aliens kind of communicate via telepathy and often speak to people in their dreams. In previous books, they had basically just nightmares about the aliens, but in this book the dreams are a little bit different. And so the question is, like, people on Gateway Station, which thankfully hasn't been infested by aliens at the point of this story, the question is, like, what are these dreams? They're changing. What does this change mean? And is there anything that they can and or should do about the dreams, right? So, as in the previous books, I would say that the prose quality in this book is above workmanlike, above average. It is serviceable. It is descriptive. One detail that I think is an influence of Stephani Perry appears to be more detailed visual descriptions of characters being delivered, and oddly enough, being delivered like a paragraph later than you would expect them to be delivered. It's weird. There's a couple of characters who get introduced in this book, and they walk into a room and they say hello, and then there's like a paragraph of stuff happening, and then there's a paragraph of description, which is kind of an unusual way to arrange things, but it doesn't hurt the reading too much. This is a very easy and smooth book to read, to be perfectly honest. So, just to give a non-spoiler version of the plot, it's about dealing with these dreams from aliens, figuring out what they are, coming up with a plan of action based on these dreams, gathering a new crew in order to deal with what they want to do with the dreams, and basically deciding what to do, how to accomplish it, and then going about the actual doing. So, as far as memorable moments, nothing especially jumped out at me. There was no point where I was like, oh, that's really cool, or ooh, that's kind of meh. There's a very steady pacing. Pacing moves at a very reasonable rate. This book, I think I practically read it in one go. Like, I sat down, I just went through the whole thing. And, like, I looked at page counts, because this one was really easy to go through. Like, it just, the first book had a lot of POV changes and a lot of, like, weird dream sequences and stuff. The second one had, a lot of points where you switched over to the villain's point of view, and, things got kind of interesting that way. This one, it doesn't really have any of that. It just kind of goes through and tells the story. And, there's nothing wrong with that, but it is a little bit less artful than the previous two books. And the length is even about the same, too. So it's not like it's a big length difference that made me feel like this is really easy reading. I looked at these books, and in this omnibus that I have, Earth Hive, the first book, is 267 pages. Nightmare Asylum is 272, and this one is 259. So, like, it's not, it's 10 pages shorter or less. And so, like, it's not like, oh, this book is an hour less time, and so it was easier to read. It's just really smooth flowing prose. So, in this book, we get a bunch of new characters, which is nice. The previous book had too few characters, I think. There was, not a whole lot of different people doing different things. And the few characters who got introduced were pretty obviously going to be, not alive at the end of the book. In this book, we get a little bit of development for the new characters, but not a huge amount. Kind of think similar levels of character development to the Marines in the movie Aliens. We get to see a little bit of their personality. We get to see a couple of interpersonal conflicts and how those are solved. We get to see a few, elements of their preferences, their backgrounds, a little bit of this and that, but nothing too extensive. So, and it's not because they all die during the book. I will say that already. Like, if you expect everybody in this book to die, not going to happen. So you can at least have a little bit of investment in the characters and not feel completely wasted away when the book is over. We get more kind of fun, but also very gory and dark stuff from the alien cultists. We do get some minor, what I would call, plot problems. We get a side quest that I think is insufficiently justified, and there are some things that I'll talk about in the spoiler section where parts of the plot don't really mesh together very well in my estimation. I would say that some things happen that I have trouble figuring out why they flowed from the thing that happened before them, right? And not because, like, there's a lot of mystery in this book. There's not. But because, like, some of the things that the characters are doing seems to be kind of insufficiently justified, and some of the assumptions that they make seem to be insufficiently... They seem to make assumptions that I would not think a reasonable person would make these assumptions. And so more on that in the spoiler section. In fact, this book has a lot less technobabble, and it is a lot less referential. We had references to Alien and Aliens in the previous books, and we even had literary references in the previous books, right? We had the occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge in the first one, and in the second one, there was a Sherlock Holmes reference, right? In this one, of course I could have missed it, right? But I didn't see anything obvious where it's like, oh, that's a literary reference, and there wasn't any of that in this book, apparently. When the characters are planning out their course of action, there is a little bit of a lack of attention paid to some of the elements of that. I was actually genuinely surprised when they said what they really wanted to do, because I saw them doing all this planning, and I was like, oh, we're just going to do that. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, we're going to do this. And I'm like, you're what? Right? And so I was very surprised by what they actually decided to do. One thing that I think is worth noting with this book is that it does have a couple of weird editing errors, at least in the omnibus version that I have. And maybe they weren't present in the original printing, and maybe it's just a typography kind of thing going on. But, it was kind of... And it wasn't a lot. Like, it was like 2 or 3. But they were like, oh, this is an obvious, editing error that probably would have been caught with a couple of careful read-throughs. And there was also a very comical reference in the book to... Like, they're talking about the size of a cargo hold, and the term that is used is cubic liters, which is like saying linear meters. It's nonsensical because a liter is already a volume, so you can't have cubic makes sense with lengths, right? But not with liters. Anyway, so some minor quality control issues and a little bit of what would you call it? Like, just say careless terminology use. Another thing about this book is that there is not a lot more, but there is a significant amount of the salacious content that's kind of peppered throughout the book. It's less gratuitous than some of the cases in the previous book, but at the same time, it's still pretty gratuitous and a little bit graphic too. So, again, this isn't a book that you hand to an 8-year-old, but even if the 8-year-old likes aliens, you might not want to hand this to them. So, yeah, We'll cut the non-spoiler section here, and we will move on to the spoiler section, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the story if you're willing to hear it. All right, the spoiler section. So, this book starts a couple of months after the end of Nightmare Asylum. Tension is high on Gateway Station, but thankfully they're not infested. I mentioned that in the earlier section. Now, the Marines, what's left of them, are still trying to fight the aliens on Earth every now and then. So, there will be a ship that goes down, and they usually just get their you-know-what handed to them. There are still broadcasts coming in from Earth, but they're getting fewer and further between, and they're getting crazier at the same time. Kind of like, the original Dawn of the Dead, right? The gradual decrease in the amount of television broadcasts until suddenly there's just nothing there. One thing that happens is that Billy starts watching some of these broadcasts, and she finds a broadcast from this girl whose name is Amy and her family, which is her father and a couple other people around. And she kind of becomes interested in following this person's life on Earth, even though there's not really anything that she can do to help her. So, what turns out to be the case is that people are starting to have dreams about the aliens, as I mentioned earlier, but they're not like dreams before. Before, the dreams were just, hey, I was in an airplane, and then my mom came out and she exploded into an alien, and I was like, right? They were, nightmare fuel, but just nightmare fuel. Now, these dreams are becoming something else, kind of like a beckoning, right? What they conclude is that there is some kind of super queen at the alien's home planet who is calling all of those who are receptive to the alien telepathy to come to her location. And so they decide, well, maybe we can use this to do something about the aliens on Earth. So they start setting up this mission to go do something with the Super Queen, but it's not very clear exactly what they're going to do. They start gathering a team of people who are mostly these dreamer characters who are having these dreams, and we get, it's kind of a ragtag bunch of people. We have a couple of technicians, a hacker, a school teacher, some Marines and former Marines, that kind of stuff. They have to get access to a ship, so they try the legal route to actually ask, and then they end up having to steal a ship. Pretty common kind of development in this kind of story. And a good chunk of this book is actually taken up by the preparation, which would be a good thing under normal circumstances, except when they talk about the preparation, they leave out one point. Namely, what exactly are they going to do with the Queen Alien when they reach her? Now, my initial impression was like, oh, they're going to bomb the alien queen in the home planet, and hopefully that'll do something, right? But at some point, late in the process, they say, oh no, our plan is to pick up the Super Queen and take her to Earth. And what that will do is she'll call all the aliens and all the cultists into one big ball somewhere on the planet Earth, and then we nuke that. And, that point, number one, that point gets said very, very late. I thought they were just going to, nuke the alien homeworld or something like that for the, decent quarter of the book. But here's the plot problem. The aliens themselves are a spreading out force, not a concentrating force. Their MO has typically been to get a foothold somewhere and spread from here to there to there. Their whole life cycle is designed around this. In fact, the whole way that, the various companies and governments are trying to get aliens to different places is by taking advantage of this very advantageous for stealth movement life cycle. It is very strange. And then in the previous book, we learned that the queens are pretty smart. Average, above average human smart, but not like super genius smart. But the Super Queen would probably be really intelligent, might actually be human super genius. And the idea that she would gather the brood, if she was put on Earth, that she would gather the brood and all of her sensitive people to herself is kind of a stupid thing to do, right? She would know that there's danger in doing that. And so, there might be reason for her to try to entice people to serve her, right? Like the cultists. But it doesn't make sense for her to call the aliens to herself and, gather a big ball of aliens that is easily destroyed. So, I don't know. This part of the plot didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It seemed very... iffy is this may work, but the odds are pretty significant that this will not work. I feel like they should have spent more time explaining why it would work, as opposed to just saying this is what we're gonna do, and then we're gonna hope it works. And it's not really that much of a plan. Well, anyway, the military won't give them a ship. There's a whole series of scenes where they decide to steal and then steal a ship. That's pretty well done. We get some stealth and some hacking and some contingency stuff happening. Oh, we got to do this right now. Oh, we got to do this right now. It's pretty fun. And they get away and they fly to the alien homeworld. And we get a pretty significant and pretty decent sized and well done action chunk, where they basically are fighting through super aliens in order to capture the Super Queen. One of the things that I did notice is that, like in the previous books, even with the good weapons that they hypothetically would have, the aliens are portrayed as relatively impervious. Not impervious, but they're relatively durable, we'll say, right? And in this book, the aliens they just explode when they're hit with a couple of bullets really, really easily. These people who are not necessarily very well trained are just shooting them all over the place, and they die in happy days. Which is another, I think, weakness in the way that this book is developed. But they do manage to grab the Super Queen, and the plan is, let's take her back to Earth, let's put her down somewhere, but not just anywhere. What the plan actually is, they explain, is that they're going to put the Super Queen down in one particular place where, back when the humans still held most of Earth, there was a bunch of nuclear bombs that were kind of networked all around the area to explode at the same time, basically. And so they're going to put the alien Super Queen there, gather all the aliens to where these nukes are, and then blow all the nukes at the same time. We get a very interesting portion of the book where they have the Super Queen on the ship, and they're flying back toward Earth, and we get some interesting, dream stuff that gets close to the point of, we're gonna, try to I'm gonna try to hypnotize you to set me free, kind of stuff, which is kind of fun. When they get back to Earth area, for some reason they get really close to Gateway Station, to the point where the Gateway Stations are sending ships after them to capture them, and they have to evade it. Like, if I think a reasonable person would have just said, let's go straight to Earth, drop the alien queen there, fly away, and then once the problem is dealt with, then we'll face what we have to face. But for some reason, they go there because they're trying to get a little bit of news about what's going on since they were gone. Right? Has anything changed to make their plan unusable or something? And the answer is no. Their plan is still just as good. And Billy gets more what would you call it? Transmissions or broadcasts from this Amy character as well. So they avoid the military transport or the military capture group, and they fly down into the American Northwest where all these bombs are hidden. And the idea is to drop off the Queen there, and then set the bombs on a timer that will give the aliens all around the Earth enough time to go there and gather together, and then the bombs will all explode. They use 6 months as the time for it, which is, again, kind of a weird guess, and it's a guess on top of a guess on top of a guess, so I don't know. But the thing that happens here, the twist right at the end, is that Billy, instead of kind of working with everybody, decides that she's going to go off to save Amy instead of helping them, get the bombs working. She flies. Now this is the part, but this is another part where things I think are not justified well enough, because she flies to the location of Amy's last broadcast, which was a month previous, right? And she's expecting Amy to still be where she was a month ago with it, which I think is kind of hard to believe. But it turns out that she actually was up until a few minutes ago. Amy's father is there. Billy and Amy's father delve into this alien hive, and they find out that the cultists have taken Amy to where the Super Queen is. So they have to fly back to where the Super Queen is, fight off a bunch of cultists, fight off a bunch of aliens, and save Amy, hopefully, ... And, if they can do that, then they can get on the ship and get away before the rest of the team basically flies away and probably end up in jail on Gateway Station. So, yeah, they managed to get away, and they set off the bombs to go off in 6 months, and the book ends. So, yeah, that's the spoiler section. They set the timer for 6 months, and then the book ends. All right, in conclusion, this is it's a good book. It's not a great book. It's not a bad book. It has some problems, but it's very easy to read. It has a you know it has some good action. It has some things that are not sufficiently justified in my mind. It has a bit of an anticlimactic and ambiguous, I think, by design ending. But overall, it's a pretty good book. It's definitely worth reading if you enjoyed the other two in the omnibus. And this is I don't know, but this might be this or the ebook version of this might be the best way to get these books at this point. So if you bought the omnibus, you have the third book, and if you liked the first two and didn't completely get and found them to be decent, then you'll probably want to continue with this one. It's pretty solidly written. There's good descriptions, there's good action, there's some good conversations between characters, there's some good character development, there's some, fun, emergency stuff where things get really, really tense. But at the same time, the book does have a few problems that I found hard to justify. But it is a fun story. It has more characters compared to the previous book, which keeps things interesting. And so, it's a fun book. The next Omnibus Volume 2, according to here, is called, or has two books, Genocide and Alien Harvest, right? And that's, no, you know what? Those are not in the pages in the back of this book. So maybe those are more books by Steve and Stephani Perry in this series, and maybe I do need to check them out. So, yeah, that concludes my examination and review of Aliens Omnibus Volume 1, 3 books, Earth Hive, Nightmare Asylum, and The Female War. These 3 books were actually a series of comics as well by Dark Horse Comics back in the day. So, if you prefer the comic book version, you can probably check that out too, which might be good, but I like novels. So anyway, let's finish this review out. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I'll put links in the description where you can get a copy of this if you feel like it. Not sure what I'll do for next time, but yeah, so far so good. And have a good rest of your week. See you later.